Respect is usually earned with a shout, but in the new world, real power is silent. We're going deep into the architecture of survival, where the intuition of the gully meets the precision of the shinobi. How does a warrior from the concrete jungle master the way of the ghost? Welcome back to Jam Asian Connection. Let's break down the discipline of the Silent Yardie. Chapter 1. The concrete forest and the hidden blade. The air in Tivoli Gardens didn't just sit, it throbbed. It was a thick soup of diesel fumes, roasting breadfruit, and the distant, skeletal rattle of a dancehall bassline vibrating through the zinc fences. To anyone else, it was chaos. To Kojo, it was a map. Kojo sat on a rusted crate in the shadow of a derelict tenement building. In his previous life, he was a shotta, a loud, visible force of nature. Back then, power was measured by the size of the gold chain around your neck and the volume of the chrome-plated Desert Eagle tucked into your waistband. But the Kojo who sat there now was a ghost in training. He watched a crew of 3 men turn the corner 2 blocks away. They were looking for him. They walked with the zest of the street chests out, shoulders swaying, eyes scanning for a target to intimidate. They were masters of street-level intuition, sensing danger through the shift in the neighborhood's rhythm. They move like lions, Kojo whispered to himself, his voice barely a breath. But a lion can be seen from miles away. The shinobi moves like the wind through the tall grass. The grass doesn't even know it's been parted. Kojo closed his eyes, tuning out the shouting from a nearby cookshop. He practiced the feudal precision taught to him by the old man in the mountains of St. Andrew, a man who had spent 40 years studying the scrolls of the EGA clan before returning to his roots in Jamaica. In the Kingston inner city, survival was about reaction. In the way of the shadow, survival was about anticipation. The shottas relied on unconventional warfare, the improvisation of the streets. They knew how to turn a stolen bike into a getaway vehicle and a broken bottle into a weapon. Kojo took that raw Yardie grit and sharpened it with the discipline of the ancient shadow warriors. To the men looking for him, the alleyway was a dead end. To Kojo, the alleyway was a 3-dimensional playground of vertical escapes and hidden angles. As the men approached, Kojo didn't reach for a gun. Instead, he reached for a small blackened piece of rebar he had ground down to a needlepoint, a street, tanto. The lead man, a brawny youth known as Rax, stopped 10 feet from Kojo's shadow. Rax was a creature of noise. He spat on the ground, his eyes darting. He felt something was wrong, his street instincts screaming that the air had grown too still. "Me know you're round here, Kojo," Rax shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete. "Come out and face the lead." Kojo didn't move. He suppressed his ego, the loud, prideful part of a Yardie that wanted to shout back, to claim dominance, to be seen. He chose silence. This was the ultimate evolution, the transition from loud street dominance to calculated invisibility. He watched the way Rax shifted his weight. The man's balance was off, tilted toward his dominant side. A feudal assassin would call that an opening. A Kingston shotta would call it slackness. With a movement so fluid it looked like a trick of the light, Kojo stepped from the shadow. He didn't use the heavy-footed stomp of the street. He used the Shinden Fudo Ryu, the immovable heart step. His feet kissed the pavement, silent as a cat on a zinc roof. Before Rax could even raise his weapon, Kojo was inside his guard. He didn't strike to kill. Not yet. He struck the pressure point beneath Rax's jaw with the butt of the sharpened rebar. Rax's world went black before he could even draw a breath to scream. His 2 companions gasped, fumbling for their waistbands. But Kojo was already gone, melting back into the gray geometry of the tenements. The 2 remaining men stared at their fallen leader, then at the empty shadows. For the first time in their lives, the concrete jungle felt like it belonged to something else, something older, something silent. Kojo watched them from a rooftop 15 feet above, his breathing steady, his heart rate low. The street had given him the intuition to survive, but the discipline of the shadow had given him the power to rule. The evolution had begun. Chapter 2. The architecture of silence. The vibration began before the sound did. It was a Friday night in Kingston, and the stone-cold sound system was warming up 3 blocks away. The sub-bass was a physical force, a rhythmic thud that rattled the louvers of the abandoned warehouse where Kojo stood. In his old life, Kojo would have been in the center of that noise. He would have been flossing, wearing the brightest colors, the loudest jewelry, making sure every eye in the dance hall was on him. In the yard, visibility was currency. If they didn't see you, you didn't exist. If you weren't loud, you were weak. But as the bass shook the dust from the rafters, Kojo stood in the center of the room, balanced on a single 2x4 wooden beam, perfectly still. He was learning to unlearn the ego. The loudest dog is the easiest to find. His mentor's voice echoed in his mind. The warrior who needs to be seen is a slave to the audience. The silent warrior is the master of the stage. Kojo began to move. This was the shadow walk. In the streets, a yardie has a distinct bop, a rhythmic, confident stride that claims space. Kojo took that natural agility, the fluidity of a dancer, and merged it with the shinobi, uruki, the silent treading of the ancient Japanese. He didn't walk, he flowed. He kept his weight on the balls of his feet, his knees slightly bent to absorb the vibrations of the building. He timed his movements to the rhythm of the distant music. Every time the heavy bass dropped, Kojo took a step. The external noise of the city became his camouflage. He practiced the architecture of silence. He viewed the warehouse not as a room, but as a collection of shadows and sound traps. He learned which floorboards groaned under pressure, and which sections of concrete reflected the moonlight. Suddenly, the warehouse door creaked open. 2 men entered, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like white blades. They were scouts for a rival crew, sent to see if the ghost of Tivoli was real. "Na shadow na round here, man," one whispered, his voice shaky. "Is just the old buildin'. Boss say him see Kojo enter," the other replied, swinging his light toward the rafters. Kojo didn't panic. His heart rate stayed at a steady 60 beats per minute. He used the meditative stillness. He didn't see himself as a man hiding. He saw himself as a piece of the darkness. He suppressed his ego, that burning desire to jump down and show them his face, to prove his dominance. He moved along the beam, his shadow walk, so precise that even the dust didn't swirl. He was directly above them now. He could smell the tobacco on their breath and the cheap oil on their handguns. In the old days, Kojo would have kicked the door open and started firing. Now he watched, he analyzed. Visibility was no longer a social requirement. It was a tactical choice. He chose to remain a ghost. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small, heavy iron nut, a common piece of scrap metal. He didn't throw it at them. He tossed it into a far corner, timed perfectly with a loud shout from the distant sound system. Clink, the scouts spun around, their backs to Kojo. In that split second of diverted attention, Kojo descended. He didn't drop like a stone. He slid down a vertical support pillar like a shadow sliding down a wall. By the time the scouts realized the noise was a distraction, Kojo was behind them. He didn't use a blade. He used the vibrant energy of the city against them. He grabbed both men by the back of their collars and slammed their heads together with a sound no louder than a ripening mango hitting the grass. They slumped to the floor, unconscious. Kojo didn't stay to gloat. He didn't leave a mark or a signature. He simply melted back into the night. As he stepped out of the warehouse and into the humid Kingston air, the music from the dance hall felt different. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was a veil. He had mastered the shift. The concrete jungle was a place of heavy bass and bright lights, but Kojo had found the architecture beneath it. The silent spaces where a true warrior lives. The Silent Yardie was no longer a man. He was becoming a myth. Chevron Wright, Chapter 3, Weaponizing the Environment, the Gully. The deep, concrete drainage channels that carved through Kingston like gray scars was Kojo's dojo tonight. In the rainy season, these were rushing rivers of debris. In the dry heat of 2026, they were tactical highways. Kojo stood at the bottom of the sandy gully, the walls rising 15 feet on either side of him. Above, the city hummed with the sound of electric taxis and the glow of neon billboards advertising BioGrain and Digicel Quantum. To the average person, the gully was a wasteland of trash and discarded metal. To a Silent Yardie, it was an armory. He knelt by a pile of scrap. He picked up a discarded bicycle brake cable. In his hands, it wasn't trash. It was a Manriki Gusari, a weighted chain used for strangulation and disarming. He picked up a shard of a broken dragon stout bottle, the thick, dark glass jagged and heavy. He wrapped the base in a piece of duct tape. "The shinobi does not carry 100 tools," Kojo muttered, testing the edge of the glass. "The shinobi recognizes 100 tools in his surroundings." His peace was interrupted by the sound of boots hitting concrete. They had found him, the top-tier crew. These weren't just street thugs. These were mercenaries hired by the city's tech lords to clear out urban interference. They had tactical vests, night vision goggles, and short-blade machetes, the Kingston long bench. The long bench mentality was about reach and power, a wide, terrifying swing intended to decapitate or limb. It was the weapon of a man who wanted to be feared. Kojo reached into his belt and pulled out his street tanto, the ground-down rebar from Chapter 1. His mentality was different, precision. The first mercenary dropped into the gully, his machete gleaming. He swung with a horizontal arc, a duppy maker strike designed to end the fight instantly. Kojo didn't step back, he stepped in. He used the 3D tactical advantage. Instead of staying on the flat ground, he ran 2 steps up the slanted concrete wall of the gully, defying gravity for a heartbeat. The machete whistled through the air inches beneath his feet. From his elevated position, Kojo struck. The glass shard, the modern shuriken, flew from his left hand. It didn't aim for the chest. It aimed for the exposed gap between the mercenary's helmet and his vest. The glass bit deep into the shoulder, forcing the man to drop his machete. Kojo landed and transitioned instantly. He didn't use the wide, emotional swings of the street. He used the tanto jutsu, style short, piston, like stabs. He used the butt of the rebar to strike the temple, then used the brake cable to loop around the man's lead leg, yanking him off balance. 2 more mercenaries appeared at the rim of the gully above. They aimed their rifles. In the old days, Kojo would have been trapped, but he knew the shortcuts of the alleyways. He grabbed a rusted iron pipe protruding from the gully wall, a remnant of old city plumbing. He swung his body upward using the momentum to kick off a discarded refrigerator, launching himself toward a low-hanging power line that he knew was dead. He vanished into the black zones, the parts of the city where the street lights had been shot out and the surveillance cameras couldn't see. From the darkness of a rooftop overlooking the gully, Kojo watched the mercenaries scramble. They were looking for a man on the ground. They weren't looking for a shadow that could climb zinc fences like a lizard and move across rooftops like a cat. He looked down at the street tanto in his hand. The fusion was complete. He had the long bench, aggression of a Yardie, but he delivered it with the hidden knife soul of a ninja. He had turned the Kingston debris into a lethal extension of his own body. He wasn't just surviving in the environment anymore. He was weaponizing it. The mercenaries left, dragging their wounded comrade. They looked up at the rooftops with a new kind of look in their eyes, superstition. In Jamaica, they call it obiya. In Japan, they call it ninjutsu. To Kojo, it was simply the science of the Silent Yardie. Chapter 4. The discipline of internal control. The digital billboard above Halfway Tree glowed with a blinding neon intensity, cycling through ads for ganja cola and cybersecurity solutions. Below it, the Saturday night crowd was a sea of smartphones. Everyone was filming. Everyone was vlogging in 2026. If a fight broke out and it wasn't on the gram or TikTok within 30 seconds, did it even happen? Kojo stood in the center of the square, his hood pulled low. He was surrounded by the hot-headed nature of the street. 2 cars had bumped fenders, and the drivers were out in the road, screaming, posturing, and waving their arms. A crowd had gathered, phones held high, hoping for blood, hoping for clout. One of the drivers, a young man with bleached hair and a flashy Zest tracksuit, looked over and saw Kojo standing still. Maybe it was Kojo's silence that unnerved him. Maybe it was the fact that Kojo wasn't filming. The youth shouted, redirecting his road rage. "Ya tink ya is a bad man, see my a talk to ya." The crowd shifted their cameras toward Kojo. This was the moment of testing. In the Kingston Code of Respect, Kojo had been dissed in public. The old Kojo, the shotta, would have felt the heat rise in his chest. His ego would have demanded a violent response to maintain his face. His adrenaline would have spiked, making his hands shake and his vision narrow. But Kojo didn't feel the heat. He felt the cold. He began the kokyu-ho, the deep abdominal breathing. He pulled the humid air deep into his belly, holding it for a beat, and then releasing it so slowly it didn't even stir the fabric of his mask. The street is a fire, his mentor had taught him. If you are wood, you burn. If you are stone, you sit in the flames and remain cold. Kojo practiced the discipline of internal control. He detached himself from the insults. He looked at the angry youth not as an enemy, but as a biological machine out of balance. He saw the sweat on the boy's forehead, the dilated pupils, the frantic pulse in his neck. The boy was a slave to his emotions. Kojo was the master of his. "I talk to you, boy." The youth stepped closer, reaching for a heavy gold chain around his neck, preparing to swing a punch for the cameras. Kojo didn't look at the boy's eyes. He looked at his center of gravity. He used the mental conditioning of the ghost. In a world of digital surveillance and social media oversharing, the greatest power was to be untrackable. To react would be to give the cameras what they wanted: a face, a name, a viral moment. To remain a ghost, he had to remain calm. As the youth lunged, Kojo didn't strike back with anger. He moved with cold, detached execution. He stepped inside the punch, his movement so economical it looked lazy. He placed 2 fingers on the nerve cluster in the youth's forearm. It wasn't a hit, it was a technical blade work strike without the blade. The youth's arm went numb instantly. His hot-headed momentum carried him past Kojo, and he stumbled into the side of his own car. The crowd laughed, the clout shifted. The youth looked back, confused and embarrassed, his bravado leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. Kojo didn't stay to enjoy the victory. He didn't look into a single camera lens. He used the focus of the shadow disciple to vanish into the crowd. He moved with a rhythm that was antisocial. He didn't follow the flow of the pedestrians. He moved through the gaps they left behind. By the time the youth regained feeling in his arm, Kojo was 3 blocks away, standing in a dark alleyway where no cameras reached. He leaned against a brick wall and checked his pulse. 62 beats per minute. Even after a confrontation, his body was at peace. "In the world of noise," Kojo whispered, "the one who can control his own heart is the one who holds the knife." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his burner phone. He saw a notification. A street live video of the confrontation was already trending. But in the video, Kojo was nothing but a blur of gray fabric, a smudge in the digital frame. The Silent Yardie had no ego to feed. He had only a mission to complete. The shadows are growing. If you're ready to see more Caribbean grit meet Eastern lethality, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Drop a big up in the comments if you're rocking with the Silent Yardie. Don't just watch the evolution, be a part of the connection. Chapter 5. The Birth of the Global Shadow Warrior. By the midsummer of 2026, the legend of the Silent Yardie had traveled far beyond the zinc fences of Kingston. On encrypted forums from London's Brixton to Tokyo's Roppongi, whispers grew about a new kind of operative, one who possessed the raw street-hardened survival instincts of the Caribbean and the surgical disciplined lethality of the East. Kojo stood on the rooftop of the Seoul Apex Tower, the tallest skyscraper in New Kingston. Below him, the city was a grid of neon blue and flickering orange. To his left lay the dark, sprawling gullies and the shanties where he was born. To his right, the high-tech docks where automated freighters moved goods across the globe. He was no longer just a shotta or a ninja. He was the global shadow warrior. In the old world, a bad man was a local king. He stayed in his turf. But Kojo understood that in 2026, the world had no borders for those who moved in the shadows. He had created a hybrid discipline. Tonite. His mission wasn't about street beef, it was about protection. A group of data raiders, international corporate mercenaries, had touched down in Jamaica. They thought the island was a soft target, a place where they could use their high-tech drones and signal jammers to steal local biometric data without resistance. They expected to find a loud, disorganized local militia. They didn't expect a ghost. Kojo checked his gear. He wore a suit of matte black, reinforced hemp fiber breathable for the tropical heat, but jagged in silhouette to break up his human form against the city skyline. On his hip was a blackened wakizashi forged from recycled leaf springs of a Jamaican truck. In his tactical pouch were jam bombs, smoke pellets made from local pimento wood and charcoal. He descended the side of the glass tower using gully climbing techniques, a frantic, high-energy scramble he had learned as a boy escaping the police. But he executed it with the silent, rhythmic weight distribution of a Yamabushi monk. He entered the server room through a ventilation shaft. The data raiders were already there, their glowing tablets illuminating their faces. They were speaking in hushed tones, confident in their technological superiority. "Signal is clear," one whispered. "No security signatures detected. These locals are still using 20th century tactics." Kojo emerged. From the vent behind them, he didn't make a sound. He didn't even breathe. He stood in the dead zone of their motion sensors, a trick he'd learned by studying how the breeze moved through the trees in the Blue Mountains. He was the archetype of mystery. He didn't announce his presence with a shout or a gunshot. He simply deactivated the room's cooling fans. The sudden silence was louder than a scream. The mercenaries spun around, their high-tech goggles scanning for heat signatures. But Kojo had lowered his body temperature through Kuji-Kiri breathing. To their thermal sensors, he was as cold as the concrete walls. "Who is there?" the leader demanded, his voice trembling. Kojo spoke from the darkness, his voice a low, melodic patois that seemed to come from every corner of the room at once. "You lookin' for the future, but you forget the roots. In this yard, the shadow is the boss." He moved. It was a 3D tactical assault. He used the desks as stepping stones, his movements a blur of Kingston agility and Japanese precision. He didn't use a gun, he used their own momentum against them. He tripped the lead raider with a sweeping cane, kick and neutralized the second with a lightning-fast strike to the carotid artery. In less than 60 seconds, the global threats were neutralized by the local. Ghost Kojo didn't take their tech. He didn't take their money. He took their hard drives and left a single mark on the wall, a charcoal drawing of a hibiscus flower entwined with a katana. As he climbed back onto the rooftop, the sun began to rise over the Caribbean Sea. Kojo looked out at the horizon. He was a protector now, a figure who commanded respect through mystery rather than noise. He was as comfortable in the darkness of a Kingston gully as he would be in a high-tech metropolis like London or New York. He was the blueprint for survival in a volatile world. He was the bridge between the ancient past and the digital future. The Silent Yardie was no longer a secret. He was a warning to the world. The shadows have evolved. Chapter 6. The Shadows Code in the old days, being a don in Kingston, meant having a line of people outside your gate, begging for favors or seeking justice. Power was a public spectacle. It was built on the eye for an eye law of the concrete jungle. If someone stepped on your toes, you took their leg. It was a cycle of blood that never stopped spinning. Kojo sat in the rafters of a community center in Olympic Gardens. Below him, a local gang leader named Biga was holding court. Biga was a relic of the old world, loud, dripping in heavy gold, and surrounded by young men holding submachine guns like they were fashion accessories. Biga was handing a small wrapped package to a 12-year-old boy named DeAndre. "Take this go round a backstop," Biga commanded, his voice booming. "If the police stop you know the code, hear nuttin', see nuttin', talk nuttin'." Move. The boy's hands shook. He knew backstop was a rival territory. He was being sent as bait, a disposable piece in a game he didn't understand. Kojo felt a ripple of the old shotta, anger in his chest. In his past life, he would have dropped from the rafters and emptied a clip into Biga for using a child. But the discipline of internal control held him steady. "Violence without a code is just murder," the old man had told him. "A shinobi kills only when the path is blocked. A protector saves without leaving a footprint." Kojo began to apply the ethics of the Silent Yardie. He didn't see Biga as an enemy to be destroyed. He saw him as a blockage in the community's flow. To kill him would create a power vacuum, bringing more police, more sirens, and more dead youths. Kojo moved. He didn't go for Biga. He followed the boy. Dandre scurried through the darkening streets, clutching the package to his chest. As he turned into a narrow passage between two zinc fences, the light from a single overhead bulb flickered and died. The boy froze. "Who Dave?" "The shadow of your future," a voice whispered. It didn't come from the front or the back. It seemed to come from the very air. Kojo stepped out of the darkness. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a guardian. He didn't tower over the boy. He knelt so they were eye to eye. This was the merging of Giri, duty, and roots. "Biga tell you say, see nuttin', talk nuttin'?" Kojo asked softly. The boy nodded, trembling. "That is the code of a slave," Kojo said, his voice firm but kind. "The code of the Silent Yardie is different. We see everything. We know everything, but we only speak through our actions. Give me the package." With a flick of his wrist, Kojo opened the package. Inside wasn't drugs or money. It was a dummy device, a weighted brick designed to look like contraband, to provoke the rival gang into a shooting war. Biga was sacrificing the boy to start a feud. Kojo's ghost discipline took over. He replaced the brick with a small carved wooden coin, a Monday featuring the image of a lion's head entwined with a katana. "Go back to Biga," Kojo instructed. "Tell him the ghost took the cargo. Tell him the ghost is watching the children of this yard. If another child is sent on a mission like this, the ghost won't visit the child. He will visit the king." The boy ran back, his fear replaced by a strange sense of wonder. He had met the legend. He had been seen by the invisible. Kojo didn't stay to watch the fallout. He navigated the rooftops, his mind focused on the internal code. To the world of 2026, he was a criminal or a myth. But to himself, he was a restorer of balance. He lived by 3 new laws. The silence is the shield. Never use your power for fame. The yard is the temple. Protect the innocent, for they are the roots of the future. The blade is the last word. Technical skill is for defense. Only the ego seeks the kill. As he looked down at Biga's compound from a distance, he saw the gang leader's face pale as the boy handed him the wooden coin. Biga knew the legends. He knew that a man you can't see is a man you can't kill. Kojo vanished into the Kingston night. He wasn't just a warrior anymore. He was the conscience of the concrete jungle. Chapter 7. The Digital Ghost. By 2026, Kingston was no longer just a city of concrete and zinc. It was a city of data. Above the intersections of New Kingston, sentinel drones, which the locals called mechanical John Crows, hovered with unblinking red eyes. Every streetlight was equipped with facial recognition, and the smart city mesh recorded the gait height and heartbeat of every pedestrian. In this world, the old-school shotta was a dying breed. They were too easy to catch. Their vanity was their leash. They posted their locations on live. They flashed their stacks on camera, and they wore GPS-enabled designer watches that told the police exactly where they slept. Kojo stood atop a telecommunications pylon, his body draped in a dazzle cloak, a poncho woven from retro-reflective fibers and infrared LEDs that blurred his silhouette on digital sensors. To a human eye, he was a shadow. To a computer, he was a glitch. The ancient shinobi hid in the fog and the trees, Kojo whispered, watching a drone drift past his position. The modern shinobi hides in the static and the data loss. His mission tonight was the digital purge. A private security firm, Iron Gate Solutions, had been beta testing an AI algorithm called Predator Prey. It was designed to predict street crime by scanning social media and street cameras to identify high-risk individuals. In reality, it was a tool for the elite to suppress the ghettos, turning the yard into an open-air prison. Kojo looked at his phone, a heavily modified brick with no GPS, no SIM, and a custom OS. He didn't use it to scroll. He used it as a shuriken of the digital age. He dropped from the pylon, landing silently on the roof of the Iron Gate server hub. This was where the discipline of internal control met the science of evasion. The building was surrounded by a geofence. If a person with a registered heartbeat or a smartphone entered the perimeter, the alarms would scream. Kojo, however, had spent months mastering the ghost pulse. Through deep zazen meditation and specific breathing exercises, he could momentarily lower his metabolic rate and steady his heart to a rhythm that the sensors filtered out as background noise or stray animals. He entered the ventilation system, moving with the shadow walk. He wasn't just avoiding the guards, he was avoiding the lenses. He knew the blind spots of the wide-angle cameras, the places where the pixels stretched and lost detail. He reached the main server room. The air was cold, smelling of ozone and expensive cooling fans. At the center sat the core, the brain of the Predator Prey AI. Kojo didn't pull out a laptop to hack it. He wasn't a nerd in a basement. He was a Silent Yardie. He pulled out a small palm-sized magnet wrapped in copper wire, a street EMP he'd fashioned from a microwave transformer and a motorcycle battery. As he prepared to plant the device, a voice echoed through the room. "You are the one they call the Ghost, aren't you?" A man stepped out from behind the server racks. He wasn't a guard. He was a digital hunter, a high-priced consultant wearing augmented reality, or goggles. He held a stun baton that hummed with blue electricity. "I've been tracking your glitches for weeks," the hunter sneered. "You think you're invisible? You're just a ghost in a world that's learning how to perform exorcisms." The hunter lunged. He didn't rely on his eyes. His R goggles projected Kojo's likely movements based on physics and probability. But Kojo didn't move with probability. He moved with the chaos of the yard. He used a sudden, jerky dancehall, bop movement, an erratic, syncopated step that bypassed the hunter's predictive software. The hunter swung where Kojo should have been, hitting only air. Kojo countered with a strike from the long bench mentality, but instead of a blade, he used the flat of his hand to strike the hunter's goggles. The glass shattered. The digital feed died. The hunter was suddenly blind, thrust back into the real world, a world of darkness he hadn't prepared for. Kojo didn't finish him. He didn't need to. He planted the M-pen, triggered it. A silent pulse of electromagnetic energy rippled through the room. The lights flickered and died. The server fans groaned to a halt. In that moment, blocks of data, the digital chains of the Kingston youth, were wiped clean. When the backup generators kicked in 10 seconds later, the room was empty. The hunter sat on the floor, shivering, clutching his broken goggles. Kojo was already back on the rooftops. He looked down at the city. For a brief moment, the red eyes of the drones were dark. The smart city was just a city again. He took his phone and did something he never did. He opened a camera app. He looked at his own reflection in the black screen. Visibility is a trap, he reminded himself. He didn't take a selfie. He didn't post a victory. He dropped the phone into a bucket of acid he had waiting in a hidden dead drop location. In a world of digital surveillance and social media oversharing, the ultimate power was to be a zero, to be a man without a file, to be the Silent Yardie. The ghost remained a ghost. Chapter 8. The Concrete Jungle Dojo. The dojo was not a building with polished wood floors and hanging scrolls. It was the roof of an abandoned garment factory on the edge of Riverton City, where the air smelled of burning tires and salt spray. The floor was cracked concrete, and the walls were the shimmering heat waves rising from the sprawling city below. Kojo stood at the edge of the roof, looking down at his first 3 students. There was DeAndre, the boy from Olympic Gardens, a former track star named Shanti, whose career had been ended by a stray bullet to the hip, and Zinc, a skinny youth who knew every shortcut and ventilation shaft in the new Kingston financial district. They didn't come to Kojo to learn how to be badmen. They were tired of being targets. They were looking for the evolution of the modern urban operative. "The street tell you say power is a big gun and a loud mouth," Kojo said, his voice cutting through the wind. "But a gun run out of bullets, and a loud mouth tell the police exactly where to find you. True power is precision and silence." He pointed to a pile of junk he had gathered, a rusted bicycle frame, a roll of copper wire, several lengths of PVC pipe, and a stack of discarded caution tape. "This is your armory," Kojo commanded. "Identify the tools." This was the lesson in weaponizing the environment. In the hands of a Yardie who understood the way of the shadow, the city was no longer a cage. It was a weapon. Shanti picked up a length of PVC pipe. "This is a fukia," she said, remembering the Japanese term Kojo had taught them, a blowgun. "If I sharpen a bicycle spoke and tip it with the milk from a devil's trumpet flower, it's a silent takedown from 20 feet. Zinc grabbed the copper wire and the caution tape, a tripwire, tied low across an alleyway. "It turns a police chase into a hospital visit," Kojo nodded. "Good, but tools are nuttin', without the shadow walk." He led them to a section of the roof covered in rusted zinc sheets, the loudest material in all of Jamaica. To walk on a zinc roof without making a boom was considered impossible. "In the yard we call it treading light," Kojo said. "In Japan they call it shinobi. Aruki, keep your weight in your hips. Use the 3D tactical advantage. Don't just look at where your feet are, look at where the supports are beneath the metal." One by one he watched them try. DeAndre went first, his feet making a thunderous clack. "Again," Kojo said. "Suppress the ego. You're trying to stomp the roof to show it you are the boss. The roof doesn't care. Be the wind. Merge with the metal." By the 4th hour the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in the colors of a bruised mango. The students were exhausted, their muscles screaming from the slow, controlled movements. Suddenly, the heavy steel door to the roof creaked open. 3 enforcers from a local political gang stepped out. They had heard rumors of a ninja school and had come to collect tax for the use of the roof. They were armed with the long-bench traditional street machetes and wore the arrogant sneers of men who ruled through noise. "Wakwan here," the leader barked, slapping his machete against his palm. "Kojo, ya start a cult. Yo owe the council $5,000 for the space." Andre and Zinc tensed, their hands reaching for the scrap metal tools they had just weaponized. "No," Kojo whispered, his hands staying their movement. "This is your final lesson for today, the discipline of internal control." Kojo stepped forward. He didn't reach for a blade. He didn't even raise his hands. He stood in the immovable heart stance. "The roof is free," Kojo said calmly. "The air is free, and your lives are free. If you turn around and walk back through that door." The enforcer laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. He swung the machete in a wide, hot-headed arc meant to intimidate. "Ya think ya is some movie star. Move yourself, old man." Kojo didn't move until the blade was inches from his chest. With a movement so fluid it seemed to happen in slow motion, he stepped inside the swing. He didn't punch. He used a precision strike, hitting the nerve cluster in the man's elbow with 2 fingers. The machete clattered to the concrete. Before the other two could react, Shanti and Zinc, inspired by Kojo's calm, moved. They didn't use violence. They used the architecture of silence. Zinc threw a handful of dust powder, ground lime and pepper, into the air, creating a momentary screen. Shanti used her shadow walk to slide behind the men, placing a PVC pipe against the back of their necks like a gun barrel. "Stay still," she whispered. The enforcers froze. In the silence of the roof, the lack of a bang was more terrifying than a gunshot. They realized they were outmatched not by strength but by a discipline they couldn't understand. "Go," Kojo said, his voice a low rumble. "Tell your council that the shadows are under new management." The men scrambled for the door, leaving their machetes behind. Kojo turned back to his students. He picked up one of the abandoned long bench blades. He looked at the edge, then handed it to DeAndre. "A Yardie with a machete is a threat," Kojo said. "A Silent Yardie with a plan is a legend. You are no longer shottas. You are the ghosts of the new Kingston." As the stars began to poke through the smog, the concrete jungle dojo was silent. The next generation had been born, not in blood, but in the cold, calculated discipline of the shadow. Chapter 9. The high-tech metropolis, the humidity of Kingston, was replaced by the artificial chill of Tokyo's Minato City. It was 2026, and the megalopolis felt like a living computer. Rain fell in thin, vertical needles, catching the neon glow of holographic fish that swam through the air between skyscrapers. Kojo stood on a platform of the Yamanote Mogline, his presence completely erased. He wasn't wearing his dazzle cloak here. In Tokyo, the best camouflage was the salaryman aesthetic. He wore a crisp, charcoal, gray suit and a slim briefcase. To the thousands of commuters rushing past, he was just another cog in the corporate machine. But beneath the suit, Kojo's muscles were coiled with the agility of a Kingston gully creeper. In his briefcase was no paperwork, only a collapsible handbow short-staff made of carbon fiber and a set of weighted climbing claws inspired by both the shuko of the Eiga ninja and the rugged iron hooks used by Jamaican dockworkers. He was here for the Neo-Zion files. A Japanese tech conglomerate, Sato Kuma, had surreptitiously purchased the digital land rights to half of downtown Kingston. They planned to turn his home into a corporate special economic zone, a playground for billionaires where the local people would be evicted by algorithms. The world is a bigger yard, Kojo thought, his eyes scanning the security drones hovering like dragonflies above the station. The predator in a suit is no different from the predator in the street. They just use better grammar. He reached the Sato Kuma Tower, a 120-story needle of glass and titanium. The security was level alpha, biometric floor, plates, iris scanners, and AI-driven gate analysis. Kojo didn't try to hack the front door. He used the architecture of silence in a new way. He went to the basement, the guts of the building. In the boiler room, he encountered the first layer of Security 2 elite, Shin, Yojimbo, new bodyguards. They were trained in modern ninjutsu and equipped with Neuralink headsets. They moved with a clinical, robotic efficiency. "Identify yourself," one commanded in Japanese, his hand hovering over a high-frequency blade. Kojo didn't answer in Japanese. He didn't answer in English. He let out a low, rhythmic whistle, a bird call used by lookouts in the hills of Clarendon to signal the arrival of the police. The guards hesitated. The sound didn't fit their training. In that moment of system error, Kojo struck. He used the long bench mentality but applied it with the precision of a surgeon. He swung his briefcase, not as a blunt object, but as a shield, parrying the guard's blade. As the briefcase burst open, the carbon fiber staff snapped into his hand. He didn't fight like a traditional martial artist. He fought with the chaos of the Caribbean. He used a bogle step, a sudden, jerky dance movement, to slip past the guard's guard. Then, using the staff like a lever, he applied a street wrestle clinch, slamming the guard into the vibrating steam pipes. The second guard lunged, but Kojo was already shadow walking up the wall. He used the verticality of the small room, rebounding off a circuit breaker and delivering a flying knee that he had perfected on the concrete playgrounds of Tivoli. The guards were down. No alarms had been triggered because Kojo had timed his strikes to the rhythmic thump of the building's massive industrial water pumps. He reached the mainframe on the 90th floor. He didn't just steal the files, he replaced them. He uploaded a logic bomb wrapped in a digital Anansi mask, the West African spider, god of tricks. The next time the corporation tried to execute an eviction order in Kingston, their systems would instead trigger a massive donation of their economic zone funds back into the community schools and hospitals of Jamaica. He saw the same patterns here as he saw in the yard, the struggle between the powerful and the hidden, the noise and the silence. He stepped out onto the glass ledge, 90 stories above the street. He didn't feel fear. He felt the discipline of internal control. He attached his climbing claws and began his descent, moving down the glass like a lizard on a zinc fence. He was the global shadow warrior. He had proven that the Silent Yardie wasn't just a Kingston legend. It was a timeless blueprint for survival. Whether in the dust of a gully or the neon of a metropolis, the warrior who masters his ego and weaponizes his environment is the one who truly owns the night. Kojo vanished into the Tokyo rain, leaving behind a corporation in chaos and a home that was finally safe. Chapter 10. The Timeless Blueprint. The peak of Blue Mountain was the only place in Jamaica where the air felt truly thin. Kojo stood at the summit, watching the sunrise bleed across the Caribbean Sea. Below him, the island was waking up. He could see the distant tiny lights of the Kingston wharves and the shimmering glass needles of the New World tech sectors. Kojo was no longer the man who had sat on a rusted crate in Tivoli Gardens. He was the architect of a new way of being. He had taken the raw, hot survival energy of the yard and tempered it with the cold steel of the East. He looked down at his hands. They were calloused from both the machete and the katana, the rebar and the staff. He realized that the Silent Yardie was not just a figure of shadow, he was a figure of balance. In the distance he heard the faint hum of a patrol drone. In 2026, the world had become a panopticon, a place where everyone was watched and everyone was screaming to be heard. But Kojo knew the secret. He who commands the silence commands the room. He wasn't alone on the peak. Behind him stood Dandre, Shanti, and Zinc. They stood in perfect stillness, their breathing synchronized with the wind. They had become the first shadow cell. "Look at the city," Kojo said, his voice carrying the weight of a tribal elder and a sensei. "Most people see a cage. They see cameras, they see walls, they see poverty. They think they have to be loud to prove they still exist. They think they have to fight the machine with noise." He turned to face them. The machine feeds on noise. It tracks your anger. It logs your ego. But it cannot map a shadow that has no name. It cannot predict a warrior who has mastered the internal control. This was the final vision. The Silent Yardie was the protector of the dark spaces, the parts of the culture that the algorithms couldn't reach. They were the ones who protected the grandmothers in the tenements and the data rights of the youth in the gullies. They were as comfortable in the mud of a Kingston gully as they were in a high-tech boardroom in Tokyo or a server farm in London. They were the global shadow warriors, a bridge between the ancient past and a volatile future. "The blueprint is simple," Kojo continued. "Stay rooted in the yard. Never forget where the grit comes from. But master the discipline of the East. Never let your emotions hold. Hold the blade, move like the wind, strike like the lightning, and disappear like the morning mist over the mountains. He handed each of them a small black stone. On one side was etched the Japanese kanji for shinobi, perseverance. On the other, the silhouette of a Jamaican Dr. Bird. "The world of 2026 is a storm," Kojo said. "Be the center of the storm." With a final nod, Kojo didn't walk down the mountain path. He stepped off the ledge into the dense green canopy of the forest. He didn't fall. He descended through the trees with the fluidity of a creature born to the woods, his movements silent, his presence erased before the leaves even finished shaking. His students followed. One by one, they vanished into the green, heading back down to the city, back to the concrete jungle, not as victims of the system, but as its ghosts. The legend of the Silent Yardie would continue to grow. He would be the whisper in the ear of the corrupt, the hand that steadies the scales of justice, and the mystery that keeps the powerful awake at night. In a world of total visibility, the ultimate power was to be invisible. In a world of total noise, the ultimate weapon was the silence. The merger was complete. The blueprint was set. The yard would never be the same. The end. Mastering the self is the first step to mastering the street. If this story sparked something in you, hit the like button and share this video with a fellow warrior. Subscribe to Jam Asian Connection for more blueprints on survival in a volatile world. Stay focused, stay silent.